Hello, and welcome to OTR Debate, our off-the-record podcast where three lawyers debate all things while managing to find out how it all comes back to the law. I'm Wee, I work in legislation, and I'll be the judge for today's debate about villains in the Spider-Man and Batman universes. Without further ado, let's meet our debaters. In one corner, we have Chicago's favorite vigilante who takes the law into his own hands by executing his own brand of justice, Mucci.
Surprised that was me. I'm Mucci, and I work in immigration. I'm not sure that fits, but okay.
And in the other corner, we have a man who was in the Amazon with my mom when she was researching spiders right before she died, Lando.
I'm Lando. I'm a prosecutor.
So, as you heard earlier, we'll be now discussing some villains from both the Spider-Man and Batman universes and debating which ones are better and or harder to beat. As always, for those who are watching or listening, the format will be opening statements, followed by questions from the judge, me, and then closing arguments and my ruling. So, counselors, are you ready?
Yes.
Yes. So, yeah, I'll start. I would just say that one measure of a good rogues gallery or villains nemesis, if you will, is how well those characters do in things that don't feature the main hero. So with Batman, we have Joker, the Joker film, the Joaquin Phoenix movie, Todd Phillips directed, that was really successful. I mean, it had a bunch of Academy Award nominations, I think as much or more than The Dark Knight, and even won one of the big ones for Joaquin Phoenix. He won Best Actor. So a very successful movie, doesn't feature Batman really at all. I think maybe his parents are shown. There's a bit of a, callback to his origin story, but mainly on the strength of just his most famous villain. And I think another good example of that is that we have some Batman villains in Suicide Squad, namely Harley Quinn, but Harley Quinn herself has her own cartoon show, which mainly features, it's pretty a comedy in a lot of ways. It features a lot of comedians doing roles. George Costanza even himself does a voice in it, but has a bunch of Batman villains as the main characters. Batman plays a bit of a side role. He takes a back seat, and the show is based entirely on the strength of his rogues gallery, his nemesis and villains. And so I think he's got the most recognizable and strongest team of villains, both in terms of their strength, but also just their staying power and their popularity outside of featuring Batman prominently at all.
Okay, so I mean, to say it a little bit shorter, another measure of some good villains and way to measure villains is their connection to the superhero or hero that they are attached to. So with Spider-Man, there's a lot of villains that he has that have personal connections to him. With Norman Osborn, Harry Osborn, the Green Goblins, they know him. Harry's his good friend in a lot of the comics and some of the movies. There's obviously different universes and different connections that he has, but for the most part, they have a strong connection to him. There's other characters like the Vulture, which was seen in he was actually Batman, Michael Keaton, in the new Spider-Man movies that came out with Tom Holland. That was, a somewhat personal connection in that he was dating the daughter, at the time, or kind of dating the daughter, or diddling the daughter, whatever. That's another measure of good villains. And I think the Spider-Man has just a good ensemble of villains that are not mentally ill. I think that's another measure of a good villain, because I don't want to label anybody that's going through some problems as a villain. So, Spider-Man's villains are, they're evil, but they're put together.
Mm-hmm. All right, you guys ready to get into the questions?
Yeah.
All right. So my first question is, in your opinion, who are the top three villains in your respective universes, and why are they better than the villains in the other universe?
Yeah. How do you want to do this, Mucci? Should we go back and forth just so that we're not going on and on?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I'll start.
Okay.
Because I have, right off the bat, Kingpin, Wilson Fisk, first appearing in The Amazing Spider-Man issue 50 in 1967. that was from 50 to 52, so it was a story arc created by Stan Lee and John Romita Sr. for the cover art. He was initially portrayed as a crime lord, still is a crime lord, still is portrayed that way. However, he's progressed since then. He was just initially like a thug that was, just a crime boss that was a little bit more physical and more involved in doing the dirty work. Now he is this martial arts expert, knowing Hapkido, judo, sumo wrestling, boxing, all this stuff. Super strong, not superhuman strength, but like top physical human strength. So probably comparable to Captain America, because I think that's what he's at in their rankings or whatever. He's been recently highlighted as a major villain in like the street level superheroes, so like Daredevil, Punisher, Hawkeye. In those shows, he's been portrayed in Daredevil, Hawkeye, and Echo, which is a new show. And he's great. He's this big fucking guy that just beats the shit out of everybody, and he's got like this army of thugs that are at his disposal. So very threatening, very menacing to Spider-Man, who is at the end of the day, he's a teenager that's street level, that's not like one of these Avenger type. He gets there, but he's not typically an Avenger type superhero.
So we're obviously going to go into the criminal underworld with Batman as well. And first I want to talk about Penguin, a.k.a. Oswald Cobblepot. He first appeared in 1941. He's a mobster who wears fancy clothing and is often kind of short and stout. Uses umbrellas with different features to them. So some umbrellas are like guns, some are swords, and there's like a mini helicopter in some of his umbrellas. He runs the Iceberg Lounge nightclub, which is kind of a front for his illegal activity. And unlike many of Batman's villains, as Counsel mentioned in his opening, he is mostly sane, or portrayed as sane. Although maybe Danny DeVito's portrayal of him in Batman Begins would be a little bit of a departure from that, maybe.
The man was out of his mind.
Maybe he's not the most accurate to the comics.
Did he bite someone's nose off?
I think so, yeah. But he's in control. No,
I do love his work.
Yes, and also, who's more disgusting, the Penguin or Frank Reynolds?
Can I offer you an egg in these trying times?
And then in a more realistic portrayal, because there's kind of some Batman portrayals that are really goofy and over the top, and some that are way more grounded, the Nolan ones, and the most recent one, The Batman, where the Penguin was portrayed by Colin Farrell, with a bunch of like prosthetics and stuff, but a much more down to earth portrayal. He's just a mob boss,
which they didn't need to do, because there is an actor that looks just like what they made him out to be.
Danny DeVito again? Or be quite a bit older. Yeah, and then also, I didn't know this before looking into it, but apparently he's a popular figure for people mocking public figures. So Jon Stewart often would compare Dick Cheney to the Penguin for whatever reason. And then there was, on the other side of things...
That's what I was talking about, actually.
Oh. Well, who played Dick Cheney in the movie? It should be...
It was Batman. It was Batman.
It's true.
Christian Bale.
Oh, was it? Wow, yeah. That's fine. And then there was also like on the other side of things, a Republican PR firm that did a parody of Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth to make fun of global warming. So it had like Al Gore as the Penguin, using his umbrellas to hypnotize penguins to believe in global warming, which I don't think they need any hypnotized to believe that. So they'll believe it when they see it.
Right.
So my second person, Venom, that's a big bad in Spider-Man. First off, symbiotic thing, creature, cream that comes from space. First appearance, The Amazing Spider-Man 252 in 1984. Spider-Man coming back from space, the Secret Wars that he fought. He's like some hero. And I've got the space cream on me. And basically, yeah.
Is that a direct quote from the comics?
Something like that.
I've got the space cream on me.
These comics are really weird after a while.
Venom is a villain that kind of has grown into so much more than how it started. So, Venom being attaching itself to Peter Parker, him having to go through his like internal struggles and the darkness within himself, then it being attached to other people, Eddie Brock, Flash Thompson, I think a couple different ones, Deadpool, Captain Marvel, and even Groot was affected by Venom at some point in the comics and at different phases and different issues or whatever. But apart from Venom, there's also Carnage, and there's also like all these other things that kind of spin off of Venom. So Venom kind of made a huge impact in the Spider-Man world and in comics in general because they're kind of all over the place. But specifically to talk about just some of the people that have been at Venom, Eddie Brock, a kind of a professional rival to Peter Parker in the journalism world.
Eric Foreman.
What's that?
Eric Foreman.
Probably the worst portrayal of Eddie Brock, because in the comics he's like this built dude, which makes sense because that's like Venom attaches itself to you and then just kind of takes your form and kind of builds upon it. They, for some reason, they picked like the skinniest fucking kid from that 70s show. It just made no sense. There's after Eddie Brock, so Eddie Brock does his thing with Venom, and he's a huge, and I think most of the time when people think of Venom, they think of Eddie Brock. That's the main person that Venom has attached themselves and been a big bad for Spider-Man. Mm-hmm. But Eddie Brock's ex-wife also had a temporary bonding with Venom and turned her into She-Venom. So She-Venom, little stunt there. That was probably, I don't know what they were trying to do there, but it was something.
Little stunt.
Flash Thompson, Peter Parker's like high school bully. We saw that in the original Spider-Man Sam Raimi movies. He was like bigger and was trying to beat the shit out of Peter Parker. In the new Tom Holland movies, he's like this also nerdy guy that is still picking on him. Kind of, I guess, like calling him a nerd, but he's also like on the same like science team as he's on.
Right, yeah.
But Flash Thompson, his kind of story arc with Venom is really interesting in that he ends up after high school and everything. He serves in the military, loses his legs, starts helping these soldiers in the VA. Then he gets involved with Venom, and for him, it starts turning into a a good thing. He turns into Agent Venom, which is this.
Sorry, Asian Venom.
I heard Asian too.
I'm sorry. Agent.
It's like a Psylocke thing?
Agent. No, he does not.
We do need a representation there.
There should be one. Agent Venom. Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1, 654 is his first appearance. And then he ends up joining the Secret Avengers, and he goes from basically, Venom, this bad person and bad alien thing, to now he's on the Avengers and doing good things with Flash Thompson. So yeah.
Well, for me, I want to continue down the mobster road for a bit. I know there's a bunch of other villains I can mention, but I do want to mention someone who kind of pulls the strings a lot all over Gotham City, and that's Carmine Falcone. Another more realistic villain. He's based on Vito Corleone from The Godfather, and he debuted in Batman Year One by Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli in 1987, which is a comic story that was really influential on all the Nolan movies and a bunch of other movies. It is like a grittier take on the origin story for Batman. So it inspired Batman Begins, the Mask of the Phantasm animated movie. But in Year One, Falcone is the most powerful person in Gotham, not only controlling all the criminal parties, but also having like the mayor, the police, city council, everyone in his pocket. And he also played a big role in another one of Batman's best gritty comic stories, which is The Long Halloween. This is a great comic in the 90s that depicts the Falcone Maroni. I'm sorry, I always want to say Marconi crime dispute, and this also then was a huge influence on The Dark Knight, and also 2022 is the Batman that I mentioned. So in The Long Halloween, there's a serial killer called The Holiday who's killing members of the Falcone crime family. And and he kills them each month on a particular holiday. That's why he's known as Holiday. And Falcone hires many of the freaks of Gotham City, which just ends up being a bunch of Batman's rogues gallery. So you have you have Poison Ivy, and you have the Riddler, and you have a bunch of other villains come up in this story. And it's a great story because Falcone kind of pulls the strings and brings all these villains together to protect himself and to fight Batman and things like that. So it's a great way to bring out like kind of the best villains of the series. Scarecrow as well is another great one that comes up in there. So I think he's a great villain because he is pulling the strings of everything in the city, controls everything without necessarily needing to be physically powerful at all, and can kind of put all these other villains like in his pocket and use them to for his own ends.
For my third villain, I kind of saved the best for last. Green Goblin, Norman Osborn, and sometimes Harry Osborn. Basically, Green Goblin, Norman Osborn, is essentially Batman, like an evil Batman. He's got the money. He is super smart. He's a bit of a scientist himself. And when he takes like the goblin serum or whatever, he becomes super strong and he's, agile and has basically all the same powers.
Mix of Batman and Bane.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. So he's a very formidable foe for Spider-Man in that Spider-Man is like one of the strongest, superheroes in the MCU. He's pretty high up there, and he's a teenager. So he deals with a bunch of other stuff and he gets older obviously, but he is on the younger side, so he deals with all these things that also affect him, like these personal relationships. He struggles with this relationship that he has with Harry, that he has with Norman. There's all these things that he kind of has to deal with on top of just being a superhero that's fighting these random bad guys. And Green Goblin kind of, brings that out in a way that they're kind of in the Batman world. It's like Batman and Joker. They go hand in hand, sort of. This is sort of the same thing with Green Goblin, Peter Parker, and Spider-Man. The only other villain to probably rival that is Doc Ock, which is like his professor at times and a scientist and kind of equally, technologically advanced with Spider-Man doing his little tech thing. But a couple of different issues that I just wanted to point out from the comic books. Peter Parker, Spider-Man issue 25, Trick of the Light in 2001. It's one where Norman Osborn, Green Goblin, kidnaps PP, puts him in a dark room, and he tries to like.
Nobody puts PP in a dark room.
he
Apparently someone does.
So he puts him in a dark room, and he is trying to psychologically convince him to be the next Green Goblin. He is torturing him, and it goes into the depths of the Green Goblin and how he succumbs to the dark side. Kind of, a little bit. We saw a little bit of that in the Sam Raimi movies with Tobey Maguire and William Dafoe, and then later on when Green Goblin comes back in No Way Home, Tom Holland's character or Spider-Man. William Dafoe is perfect for this role in that he shows the various aspects of dealing with his inner demons and dealing with his craziness and becoming the Green Goblin and almost having this split personality pretty much. And that issue really goes into that. Another one, The Amazing Spider-Man 39 through to 40. It's very early on in the run, obviously. The Amazing Spider-Man being the first run, they both find out each other's identity. So it's Green Goblin finds out Spider-Man's secret identity and vice versa. And up until then, no one has figured it out. No one, even the readers at that point, didn't know who the Green Goblin was. So when someone was reading this at the time, they were like, what the hell? He's the Green Goblin. What the fuck? And and it's kind of some of that went into those initial Spider-Man movies, and I think that's what made him good, and that's what brought about this. It really sparked the superhero genre.
The cover of one of those two is Peter or Spider-Man unmasked, being dragged by Green Goblin's cables.
Yeah, the tethers, yeah.
It's pretty. I remember that vividly.
Right, yeah. And so it's obviously very iconic. Even the artwork, episode, or I guess issue. Yeah. The last one I have, just really quickly, and it's a huge one actually. The Amazing Spider-Man from 1963, 121 to 122, the night Gwen Stacy died, and the Green Goblin's last stand. So, they're into it. They've been getting into it. Spider-Man and Green Goblin, and finally they have this tussle where Gwen Stacy falls to her death from a ridge, and then from the story arc, he just fucking goes off. Spider-Man goes off, beats the shit out of Green Goblin, and almost kills him, and it brings him to that point where he's almost gonna fucking kill him. We kind of saw that in No Way Home, where Aunt May dies, and then he's beating the shit out of him, and then takes other Spider-Man to pull him back. But it's just kind of one of those things where it makes him question his morality and pushes him right up to the edge.
I think it has that image from that Sam Raimi uses in the first movie where Green Goblin's like impaled by his own glider, and he's kind of like heading over. Yeah, good stuff.
Thank you.
Well,
I agree.
Obviously, I am going to talk about the Joker, but everyone's talked about the Joker like way more than I could ever get to, so I will just be brief. Everyone knows who the Joker. Like I said, he has his own movie, and it's really interesting though. He has like a very mysterious background. I mean, even in the movies like The Dark Knight, he lies. Like he tells 3 different stories about how he got his scars, things like that. You don't know anything about this guy really. Like,
I don't think there's ever like one actual definitive origin for him, right? Like, and it's constantly changing too. I think with like sometimes they'll release something where it's like, oh, this is his origin or whatever, and no, not really.
Which I think makes him so. I don't think there's really any other villain like that has a not clear cut origin. Like it's just so. It's just I mean, there's so many different explanations for how he got the way he is. Or he's always this way or whatever. But I mentioned some of the portrayals. There's many different actors that have portrayed him in many different roles over the years. Cesar Romero in the Batman series in the 60s. And then Mark Hamill in the animated series and also in some of the video games. And then Heath Ledger, Joaquin Phoenix, Jack Nicholson, and even Zach Galifianakis in the Lego Batman movie. Really? Which the whole plot of the Lego Batman movie hinges on the Batman saying to the Joker, like, I'm not as important, or you're not as important to me as you think you are. So and Joker treats it almost like a breakup. So he's like, I am important to you. I am your number one nemesis, and needs to prove it to him by like doing his whatever evil scheme he does in that movie. But it is like a funny kind of take on the lore of Joker's like always going to be Batman's number one nemesis.
You did leave out my favorite, Rainn Wilson as Dwight Schrute as the Joker.
I did leave that out. You're right.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Moving into my second question, thank you for going through your top 3 villains of each universe. But I did want to posit this question of if Batman and Superman were to switch universes for 1 month, how would it go, and who would fare better?
I don't even think it would be like close at all. I really, so if the villains went to the superheroes universe?
No, if the superheroes went into the other.
Okay, so if Batman were brought into Spider-Man's universe, I think he'd be fucked because I've kind of already mentioned it. Green Goblin, Norman Osborn he's the villain Batman. Like he has all that money, he has all that technology, and he's smart. He's probably smarter than Batman. Batman's a detective. Bruce Wayne's a detective, and he's the greatest detective, whatever. So he's pretty clever, but he's not this scientist that runs this huge corporation that has all this technology. And Norman Osborn, so I would probably put it just on Green Goblin beating him alone, but Norman Osborn and the Green Goblin have a tendency to team up, to actually assemble different teams. He runs his company Oscorp, employs thousands of people, but 2, he's been in the Dark Avengers 2009 comic book run, where he was essentially Iron Man. He was the Iron Patriot. He has the technology to basically make himself Iron Man. Has frequently been, I believe, the leader of the Sinister Six. I think usually it's Dr. Octopus, but Osborn has led them too. And then with the rest of my team, or the villains that I've chosen on this, Kingpin would totally line up with him, because you don't want the Bat to get involved in your criminal enterprise, you know. And then Venom would be along for the ride, and he would just be completely overpowered by the money, by the technology, by the super strength. There's not enough time in the world to prepare for what they've got would let him win. I think that they would just really overwhelm him.
Well, that's interesting. I didn't even think about this before when you said that Green Goblin will assemble a team. Well, Spider-Man in the comics, at least early on, and many of the most iconic roles, often is solo and often is not really able to. He gets rejected by the Avengers. He is always kind of on his own. Whereas Batman, he's part of the Justice League. So I think if he were in this universe, he'd probably have the Avengers on his side, some kind of other group on his side. He'd probably join a team because he shows that he's a team player. But
doesn't he always circumvent the Justice League? Doesn't he have some kind of plan B for killing all of them or something?
Batman's gonna kill all of them?
He has some plan to if Superman goes haywire, he's got a plan to kill him, or maybe subdue him. I don't know. Yeah. He's got a plan for each one of them, and he lets them know, and they're like, "What?"
Okay.
So he's sneaky.
Yeah. Well, I guess you need that sometimes.
Sorry to hijack.
Helps him survive. Yeah, so he doesn't have to deal with as many superpowered villains because, yes, Batman's villains are mainly people, more realistic portrayals of people. Although you do have stuff like Killer Croc and Poison Ivy and some others that are definitely...
Clayface or something?
Clayface, Freeze, Dr. Freeze. Or Mr. Freeze? Give him a PhD.
I think that's an ice cream.
He does have one, though.
Oh, he's a doctor? Yeah.
I think he is a doctor.
I don't know. I second-guessed myself for a second there.
We got to Google it. Does Arnold have a PhD?
But really, money is Batman's superpower. He mentioned money with Green Goblin, and Spider-Man has often hardly any money. So I think Batman can put his money to good use to figure out a solution to these issues. Spidey does figure out certain things like how to... Well, because Spider-Man's villains a lot of times are based on some kind of science. You have or at least he has a scientific solution to combating them. So you have Sandman. Spider-Man's going to find a huge tank of water to pour all over him. You have Electro, and Spider-Man's going to use some kind of way to short circuit him or whatever. So I think Batman could come up with those solutions with probably a lot more devices. That's definitely what Batman is known for. I mean, Spider-Man has a few, but Batman has bat everything, So I think he could, find some solutions and develop some easy, quick, bat things to throw at these guys. Because he's not gonna beat them with his fist. But to be honest, neither does Spider-Man. Spider-Man often does have to find another solution to beating all his villains. He doesn't just brute force them.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
And if we're doing, as a clarifying, if we're doing superheroes going into the villain's world, does Bruce Wayne's bank account transfer over?
Not necessarily, since the Bank of Gotham, or
he's gonna have to start from scratch. He's pull himself up from his bootstraps or something.
And then Spider-Man goes in his universe and is super rich, just inherits all of that.
Because that is his biggest. Make no mistake, that's Spider-Man's biggest fucking weakness.
Yeah. And Bruce's biggest strength. Yeah.
The creditor.
So yeah, like I said, he'd often, as you read the comics, Spider-Man, or even in the movie, he has to find a kind of solution to beat the villains that is not just punching them over and over. But I think a kind of close comparison of villain to villain is probably Kingpin to Bane in terms of physical strength. Bane is also like, the peak physical condition, great at hand-to-hand combat, and super strong. But he can also augment himself with the Venom to make himself even stronger. So, Bane snapped Batman's back. I think he'd snap Spidey like a twig.
Probably not. I mean, Spider-Man's like so fucking strong.
All right. Well, anyway, before we get to our last question, do us a quick favor and subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on TikTok while you can, Instagram, Facebook, whatever you're on. Add us and give us a big review. All right. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
And our final question, typically, will be bringing it back to the law. So go ahead.
Well, yeah, so I'm just going to stick to not the external world, but like the world of the comics, the story itself. So, of course, Harvey Dent is a district attorney in Gotham. He became Two-Face. In the comics, he becomes Two-Face after the mob boss Sal Maroni splashes him with acid, disfiguring half his face, turning him insane. And so this is like the depictions in the comics I mentioned. Year One, The Long Halloween. And then in the Dark Knight movie, it's a little bit different. But in that one, he's shown as an idealistic district attorney trying to clean up the streets of Gotham through the legal system as opposed to the vigilantism of Batman. So his first scene in the Dark Knight shows off his lawyering abilities. He's impeaching a witness with a sworn statement that he gave that Salvatore Maroni is now the head of the Falcone crime family, directly contradicting what the witness just said. And the witness then reacts by pulling a Chinese gun on him, and Dent punches him in the face. So a little over the top for most courtroom proceedings, but Dent is able to keep his composure.
I love it.
He's able to very quickly retain his composure and continue to cross-examine the witness. But yeah, it's unfortunate.
Wait, I don't remember this part.
Yeah.
He keeps asking him questions after he punched him?
He does. He punches him out. He takes the gun and says, "Made in China. Next time, buy American." And then the judge is like, "Get him out of here." He's like, "Wait a minute, I'm not finished with him."
Wouldn't have happened if you had Asian Venom there.
Yeah.
Agent Venom.
After his spoiler alert death in The Dark Knight, a movie that literally everyone in the world has seen. The Dent Act was a law that was passed after his death in the movies that wiped out organized crime in Gotham City. So here we have a legal act that just is Gotham City is very dangerous, and it's overrun by organized crime. So it locks up like all the criminals in Gotham without parole. And in The Dark Knight, Dent had put away 549 members of the mob in like one trial, basically, which is just crazy. But the act basically put in effect so that all of those mobsters, 1,000 of them, would go away. The act is a direct response to how they were often able to get out on bail and hire the Joker in The Dark Knight. So yeah, he has some legal legacy beyond his death in the films.
Okay. Yeah. I have a couple of different things. I'll try to keep them brief. But in the real world, not this fairy tale world that Mucci's talking about, Canon Films, this independent studio, bought the rights to Spider-Man from Marvel, and they were unsuccessful in making a Spider-Man movie and went bankrupt. Marvel did too in 1996. That was probably part of the reason why they sold, the rights to that studio. The rights of Spider-Man were then lost in 1999, and Marvel recovered them and then sold them to Sony. So this was at a time where Marvel wasn't this huge thing that it is now. There's no MCU, there's no superhero movie like craze, or it's kind of dying down now, I suppose, but it wasn't as big as it is now. Until 2002, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man with Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst. After that successful trilogy, all these movies become a little bit more mainstream. and the MCU starts coming about, but Sony still has these Spider-Man rights, right? And recently we've seen with Tom Holland being in the MCU, Sony's been letting MCU kind of use Spider-Man, not any of the villains yet, but they've been letting the MCU mess around and play with Spider-Man, not Tobey Maguire. Well, actually, yeah, Tobey Maguire, yeah. He was in No Way Home. But Tom Holland in his 3 movies and in all these Avenger movies. But Sony is also simultaneously trying to create their own little Spider-Verse or whatever with Morbius, with Venom, this trilogy. People like Venom. I don't really care for Venom. I don't know if you guys have even seen it. It's not for everybody. The Sony movies kind of don't, I feel, do these characters justice. And I think that if they were all to transfer over to the MCU, they'd probably do a lot better because they are fascinating and like good characters. Like I mentioned, Venom's like an amazing character, whether he be Eddie Brock or Flash Thompson. Recently, Madam Web, and I know you introduced me with a quote from Madam Web.
Well, it's only from the Madam Web previews. It's not actually in Madam Web.
Okay, I've never seen it.
It's worth it for the memes.
Okay,
yeah.
And soon, I'm not sure the exact release date, but they're gonna come out with Kraven the Hunter, which is a big Spider-Man villain as well, played by the same actor that played Quicksilver in the MCU. He's running really fast, but bullets caught up to him and killed him. Aaron Taylor Johnson. So Sony still has the rights. MCU should have them. Marvel, gave it up at a time when they were desperate for some money. In the comic book world, Matt Murdock has, and I think we've mentioned this before. I think I might have brought this up last time we were talking about C2E2 or going to C2E2. Matt Murdock, Daredevil, has defended Spider-Man on screen and in the comics. In No Way Home, Murdock becomes Peter Parker's lawyer when he's accused of killing Mysterio, and it's like this whole thing. He's like most wanted or whatever, and he's in his tighty whities, and like the news are outside or whatever. It's a huge thing because at that time Charlie Cox wasn't going to be coming back as Daredevil, but like on screen, he's now a part of the MCU. But apart from that, in the comics, in The Amazing Spider-Man 219, Peter Parker, criminal, Peter Parker uses his powers to basically do an expose on Rikers, and that like they don't have good security for their prison, and he's probably pissed off because he has to fight these people over and over again because they keep getting out. So he tries to do this expose, uses his powers to get in, and then he's caught. And he's jailed, and they're basically accusing him of letting these criminals out. And he's like, no, like I've got photographic evidence that I'm not a part of this, and I'm not the one. And so they bond him out. I think Aunt May, her broke ass, gets him out somehow. And Matt Murdock represents Peter Parker, and wins the day. So. At that point, it's kind of interesting. At that point, he doesn't know that he's Spider-Man, and then later on, in issue 107, he finds out that he is Spider-Man by listening to his heartbeat or whatever.
All right, so we have reached the closing portion of this debate. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. I think, Batman is often portrayed in this very realistic, dark and gritty way. Whereas Spider-Man has a different kind of tone to it, right? But Batman sometimes is also portrayed in a comical, funny way. In the 1960s TV show, that was all comedic, all kind of like poking fun at the cheesiness of Batman. And his villains can kind of play both sides of it. And I think because his villains have very distinct characteristics and are very iconic in their own way, the goofy, cheesy version of them is often really funny. So I mentioned earlier the Harley Quinn show, and in particular the character of Bane. Everyone since Dark Knight Rises has come out has made fun of the Bane voice, because it's just like, it's a very serious movie, but that is the most like kind of like easy, fun voice to imitate.
Do it.
Oh, Bob. It's always just like, oh, you were born in the, what is it? You were merely raised by the darkness. It's always this, like, I don't know why he did that voice. But, so, like, there's the Bane in the Harley Quinn show is played by this really funny comedian, James Adomian. And it's all that voice all the time. And it's just like, I don't even think that was a thing before the Dark Knight Rises came up. And now everyone does that goofy Bane voice. So I think he has, and I don't think there's really anything like that for Spider-Man. I think Batman has like these, you can have the serious ones and you can have a little fun too and make fun of the villains as well.
So for my villains, there's nothing funny about the superhero's girlfriend getting murdered. All right. I mean, your villains might joke around here and there, but there's nothing funny about murder. But Spider-Man's pretty funny. He jokes around. He's webbing them up. He's making these jokes, and he's having a good time. But at the same time, these villains are very they're very connected to him. They have these personal connections to him, and they affect him in a way that's probably not the same with Batman's villains because he is on the younger side and because they're these superhero villains that know him. Some of them know him, know his aunt, know his girlfriends, and I mean the Green Goblin, Harry Osborn, is his best friend in some comics, in some portrayals. So there's this connection to Spider-Man that I think that some of the Batman villains don't have to Batman, and I think it's very important and kind of builds the characters up, builds their threat level to Spider-Man and that universe. Thank you, Cammy.
All right. Well, hearing both sides, I was kind of going back and forth throughout all of your guys' arguments. And I do think that the Spider-Man villains are stronger, generally. But I do think that the Batman villains are more iconic in terms of not only Bane's voice, but the prevalence of Harley Quinn as a Halloween costume, Joker being portrayed in like The Office, as I mentioned earlier, and
I think that's what you wanted for you. I think you had, as soon as you remember The Office, I think you were like, oh fuck, Dwight.
That being said, I will give it to Mucci for the Batman villains.
I'm gonna do one more quick turn. All right, well, thank you.
Thanks so much. This has been an OTR debate.
Thank you.
Thanks.